Welcome to another episode of Relentlessly Resilient, where real people share real-life experiences and the tools they've developed to move forward and live their best lives. I'm Jennie Taylor.
And I'm Michelle Scharf. Today we have with us Darcy Van Orden. She has a brilliant father that was unfortunately saddled with the disease of Alzheimer's, and she's going to share with us her story. Darcy is a longtime friend of mine. We have been through some amazing life experiences together. I actually got to meet her dad. They lived out in, is it West Virginia that they were living?
No, Northern Virginia.
Northern.
Great Falls.
Northern. Yeah. Oh my gosh, it was beautiful. Their land, their home. And I got to meet her dad, and her dad definitely loved his baby girl. That came through clear to me. Darcy, tell us about your dad.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. It's definitely an emotional subject. I've never been able to talk about my dad without being emotional. So forgive me, today is definitely be hard.
It's okay.
Yeah. To start off by saying, I guess the biggest thing I want to say is my greatest privilege in life is absolutely being the daughter of Robert Joseph Taylor. And my dad was my hero. Gosh, I didn't feel like
okay.
I was hoping it wouldn't start off so emotional, but here we are.
It's okay.
But yeah, my dad was absolutely my hero, and he was absolutely the greatest man I've ever known. And I know that some women say they have daddy issues. I'm like, my issues are that my dad was so wonderful. And I think that makes it difficult, I think, to date post-divorce and other things, and just realize that, like, you know, he set such a high bar in my life and represented kind of everything in my example in my life. And so I feel more than anything, I just feel super grateful to have been his daughter. So I'll start there. My dad grew up very modest means in Magna, Utah. He was the oldest of 5 boys, and he was the son of a machinist, my grandfather, in the Kennecott copper mill. And so, you know, as the oldest son, you know, kind of led his brothers in so many amazing ways. When I like to think about my father's childhood, I imagine him very much like the young man in October Sky. My father's mind was absolutely brilliant. He was kind of a prodigy in math and science. He started building rockets in elementary school and, you know, through high school and other times in his life. He attended Cypress High School. He was the editor of the school newspaper, a straight-A student, of course, and also the valedictorian in his class. After high school, he served a mission in the Eastern States Mission, and that covered New York City, New Jersey, Connecticut, and that's actually where my parents met. My mom also served Eastern States Mission, which I think was pretty exceptional for her time to be serving a mission at that time for their church, for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so they met on their mission. They both served at the Mormon Pavilion in 1965 at the World's Fair. So it was an incredible opportunity to connect with just the world in that very special way. So that is just an awesome experience that they had together. After their missions, you know, they courted. My father was at University of Utah getting his degree in mathematics. One of my favorite stories I like to tell that I learned when my parents were dating, my father, he was bold in his pursuit of my mother. And just so you know, the story I'm about to share it feels kind of out of character for my dad, but just in how he pursued her following their mission is that he asked her on a date, they went, my mom, you know, she was, you know, meeting other suitors, and she told him, hey, we're going to have a date earlier in the day. She's like, but I am planning to meet another gentleman later. And he's like, great, let me walk you to your other date, right? So my father, walks my mom to this other date. He takes her by the hand and walks her there. And when they arrive at this date, he just won't let go of her hand. My mom is like struggling to like get my dad to let go of her hand. He won't. And he just says to this gentleman as he arrives, he said, where are we going? And so I think quickly that, the other suitor got the hint that he didn't want to be the third wheel on their team date. So he just left. And my mom, obviously a little frustrated with him, but nonetheless, that was, one of those bold, kind of out of character moments for my dad, but he was pursuing my mom and said, like, that's it,
that is so mine. Great.
He was not going to let her
he
go.
was going to hang on to her at all costs.
He wasn't. He's like, so just fun to think about all of that. And then after they were married, they went off to Cornell, and that's where my father went and got his PhD in physics. And so after that, he got his first job at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab in Baltimore, Maryland. So my parents moved, of course, there. Just prior to that, they lost their first child. Tiffany was their first, and they were living in Potomac, Maryland. She died of SIDS.
Oh,
and
my
11
goodness.
months old. Yeah, and so that was obviously a difficult time for them, being that they were both the oldest in their family. It was the first grandchild. She passed of SIDS. Then when they moved to Maryland, into Columbia, Maryland, we were all six of us then were born within 9 years, in the Howard County General Hospital. I know. So had us 6 kids there, and I can just tell you that my dad was just exceptional in everything that he did. Obviously, he was a rocket scientist, so absolutely brilliant man. Just to mention briefly in his career, he researched everything from space surveillance, hypothermia, super flywheel, which is the principles that electric cars work on, all kinds of radar, working with satellites. My mother, while I was towards the end of elementary school, she had breast cancer, and it was pretty advanced. And my dad, prior to my mom getting cancer, had like never cooked anything. Like he had made toast. And so when my mom was sick and not available, with 6 kids, I mean, my dad, he just stepped up. I mean, initially it was like pork and beans and like a cheese sandwich, not a grilled cheese sandwich, but just like bread with cheese in the microwave. Right. And so, we were all just kind of like, what are we eating? It's so different from mom. But, in time, but no matter what, he always stepped up. He was always there, to step up and help. And so, in doing all these things. So as, when that occurred with my mother, he became very interested in cancer. And so he was still with Johns Hopkins, and he kind of expressed some of this interest. And so they actually had him start to do additional research on cures for cancer. And he traveled not only to about 4 major institutes in the nation, including the Huntsman Cancer Center, but that was all part of his research and finding out what all the different institutes were doing in relation to the curing of cancer. So just an incredible thing that my dad, because of my mother, was so interested in finding that cure. So I guess when it gets back to my dad and his just day-to-day work, I feel like the reality is, he would tell us snippets. I mean, the reality is all of his work was pretty top secret. He didn't really go into a lot of, details about what he was doing every day. So for the most part, I think a lot of that was a mystery to us, and especially as kids. So I would always joke that my dad stirred plutonium at work all day, and that was his major function. And he would laugh, and he loved that idea, and we would just kind of leave it there. That was his daily activity, but he was really just so heavily involved in so many things, including boost phase of intercontinental ballistic missiles. I mean, just everything. So he was just had his hands on a lot of things over the entirety of his career. But more than anything, I loved the fact I was his baby girl. I had 2 older sisters and 3 brothers. And I just loved being able to make my dad laugh. That was always important to me. And he had an infectious laugh. But really, even though my father accomplished, I think, so many incredible things, I feel like that had nothing on who he was as a father and who he was as a person. I feel like who he was in general is just a loving, kind, just sweet, humble person. And that's really the essence of who my father was. He was just a gentle person. He radiated love. He was without guile. I never heard my father speak ill of anyone. He was just a gentle person by nature, and sweet and happy, and just always willing and always doing. Despite him being the most intelligent person I've ever known, he was also the most humble. And that's what I think impressed me the most, is he was always humble. He was always kind. He was always helping, and just a true servant leader by nature. He had his hands in everything that we were doing as kids. He would go to work. He would wake up super early. By the way, he was like one of those early to bed, early to rise. Often he'd get to bed, he was definitely cash. By 9 p.m. he was asleep. We could tell by 8:30 in his chair, and he's just, he just couldn't wait to get to bed, right? And so, but prior to that, it was like, because he was productive, he was doing so many things to help us all prior to bedtime, that for sure he was just absolutely exhausted. And I just think about the fact that he never watched television. He was always engaged in a good work. I honestly only have one memory of my father watching TV, and that was actually, I can literally pinpoint this. It was in 1989, and I was 10 years old, and we were watching the news broadcast of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Oh. And my father is just weeping. He is just weeping and watching this. And I just remember him, he just wanted to share with me and the rest of us just the significance of what was happening and why it was so important. And all of us should understand how important this moment was for the world. And that was honestly the only time I even remember him ever watching TV. He'd usually, tease us if we were sitting and watching. He'd be like, turn that crap off. Like, go do something productive, go expand your mind, go do something. And we would laugh, and we,
go read a book.
Sure, Dad.
Yeah, absolutely. He was right. Like, there was something else that we needed to do to be engaging our minds, or, working on something productive. And he was always finding ways to engage us. I mean, he had a garden, and he was always composting and teaching us things. And I mean, when it came down to it, it's like homework wise, like, honestly, I could ask my dad anything. He always had an answer. He loved just doing stuff with us. He was always taking us swimming or going on a bike ride or, going on a walk. He loved, without fail, we always had like a Sunday walk around the lake together as a family. Or we'd be riding bikes, and then or he'd be taking us to the ice rink. All my brothers played hockey. He'd be watching, going to all their games. All of us played lacrosse. So he'd be coming to our games, and he loved watching us all play sports. Honestly, every weekend we, as a family, went to either the science center, which, he loved that because obviously he could teach us more about science at the science center. Or we'd be going to the National Aquarium. So it was just something engaging. But, my parents made the family time such a priority in my family. And my father, he was such a man of patience. Like, if anything else, he was just so patient. And every year we would drive. Obviously growing up in Maryland, we would drive to Utah every year. So both of my parents had grown up here. All of our extended family was here, aunts, uncles, cousins, all our grandparents. So every year we would take this drive, from Maryland to Utah in our van. And I mean, honestly, like my parents were like saints to do this with like their 6 kids, like all those hours. Like I feel like I have PTSD from thinking about sometime on that drive,
That's an
so
intense road trip every single summer.
right. Every single summer without a doubt, we'd spend like 3 weeks in Utah. Cause it was just like, okay, like when we got to drive back, we got to like prep for this emotionally. Right. So yeah, so it was just all of that. But beyond that, he would enjoy taking us we'd go as a family to the Smithsonian and, visiting all the historical spots of Williamsburg, Gettysburg, Philadelphia. He put such an emphasis on knowing and understanding our family history. So one of the incredible things that my father did is he started, this major documentation process. This is prior to the internet, right? Like he's writing letters to ancestors and visiting historical sites and trying to research our family history. He was constantly writing letters and other things, but, he would take us out to Pennsylvania because our ancestors were Quakers, and my ancestor was, he was the treasurer with William Penn. So they founded the state of Pennsylvania, in the late 1600s. And so like, it was important for us to go visit like one of the historical homes of our family there and just like understand our Quaker heritage, which I value. I have such a tremendous connection to Quaker beliefs and ideals. I feel like that's so much about what my beliefs, I feel like, are just completely in concert with so much of the Quaker belief system. So it's beautiful. And he made it so important. He was just very active in his, by nature, always engaging in good work. Like I mentioned, he had, this garden that he liked to tend to. I just remember him giving me wheelbarrow rides as a child, just wanting to keep us engaged in good work. Like even just like, hey, you got to clean out the garage, and you all roll your eyes and you're like, oh my gosh, Dad, don't do this to us this Saturday. But it's like, we just got to go out and we got to
but there's that. No getting out of it. So
there's
get
no
out
getting
the
out of
it.
And honestly, you would never want to say no to my dad, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like he's not an authoritarian by any means. He's gentle, he's loving, he's kind. Like he's not a disciplinarian, right? So it's almost like if my dad asks, like it is granted, right? So it's just, but yeah, even hard things. But he always made it worthwhile. But yeah, growing things in the garden, he did that. He was always helping us with homework, as you can imagine. Your father's, rocket scientist can help you with your science fair project, right? Like I was like, yeah.
I hate to be the kid in your class when you show up and be like, wait, Darcy, did your dad help you with your homework? I don't know about that.
Exactly. I'd be like, Dad, can you get clearance from APL so we can extend some of this into my project? What can we do here?
He sounds like such an amazing dad. I'm just listening to all these memories. I'm thinking, man, he kind of sounds exhausting just to be so, but you could tell he loved life and he was involved in your life, in his professional life, in your community life, in the sport life, everything. I've loved learning about him a bit. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we want you to help us see the transition that maybe came as he got older and unfortunately was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So we'll be right back. Okay, so Darcy, I'm still laughing about asking your dad for help with math homework because I'd be like, okay, Dad, it's not rocket science. Oh, wait, it is rocket science. Wait a sec, I'm stuck. So you've got this amazing dad who sounds just all in, engaged in life, family life, professional life, everything that he does. There's no sitting back on the couch just flipping the remote through channels. Tell us about the transition and what happened and when in your life you guys entered a new stage as you started to battle the Alzheimer's disease.
Absolutely. So I would say that transition came, it wasn't until about after he had retired. So, which, at 65, I feel like that's still a fairly early onset, I think. And it was very subtle at first. At first it kind of looked like, as he had always been by nature, this gentle, patient person, right? And all of a sudden he became a little more impatient, right? And he would be easily flustered or frustrated by things happening around him. It's just, and then and so here's the thing. I moved out to Utah in 2006. I would be back in Virginia visiting my parents probably between 1 and 3 times a year. So I did see that subtle just change in him over time as I was back there fairly regularly. And so it was very incremental. It was very slow. So it wasn't even like at first. I think it took several years before we even realized that we need to go get this diagnosis for sure. So it
really?
was just,
at what point did you get to that? What did you start to see that was like, okay, you guys, I think we're going to need to get in and get a diagnosis? How do you know when it goes from he's just getting a little older to I think there's something going on?
Well, I mean, one of the big moments for me was I remember flying home, going in and excited to see my dad. I feel like he just became increasingly withdrawn over time, but I just remember sitting down with him and being like, Dad, I just got back, I'm excited to see you. What have you been up to? And his reaction was that, oh, he's kind of like, I'm like, he was like, I was just driving today. And I'm like, well, Dad, where did you go? And he was just like, pause. And he was just like, I don't remember. And it was just one of those things where I was like, you don't remember where you were? Like, what happened? And then he really couldn't answer and didn't have an answer for me. And that's when I was kind of like, Mom, like, we've got to talk. Like, Dad doesn't seem to remember where he was earlier in driving. He shouldn't be driving.
Right.
He's not having a recollection on things. And I feel like because obviously my mom was around him and his caretaker full time, I think, he just kind of had I would say a very normal schedule every day where he would want to go to Great Falls Park and enjoy the beauty there. And then maybe he'd run to the grocery store and want to get some more yogurt or fruit, right? Like, it's not like, I don't think he ever really went too far. He just kind of had this regular routine, but it was even still with that. That's what I think became concerning. But I know that like my mom realizing like she was going to have to take his keys away. She knew that was going to be a struggle.
Right.
And like, how do you address that? And, he would get upset and be, concerned of what's happening. And I think he could tell too, like he was frustrated by the fact that he couldn't remember things. Right. And for somebody as brilliant as a mind that my father had, like that was just like the hardest, most devastating thing. And, so I feel like those were some of the moments that helped. And I do feel like my mom and his caretaker also wanted to believe that this wasn't happening, right? Like she wasn't losing her husband, of all these years is losing his mind. I feel like, for her, that was difficult to deal with as well as increasing her responsibility as caretaker. That takes its toll on people for sure. So I would say losing some of his patience, being bothered by little things that never bothered him before. And then, as I mentioned previously, my dad had been somebody who had always been early to bed, early to rise. And it seemed that over time, like he was just getting less and less sleep. And I really believe, as I look back on how little sleep he got over the years, that that was such a key factor in like his body was never rejuvenating. You know what I'm saying? Like he was not getting, like they always say, like people need 7 to 9 hours. People are pretty firm on some of these sleep study beliefs. I know there's people who say, oh, I don't need that. I need less. I'm telling you as somebody, I know that I need 7 hours. I know for him over time, he was just be getting less and less sleep. And I really I think that really affects your cognitive abilities. And so I think that just continued to worsen over time. And go ahead.
So what year was this? You had mentioned when he retired, he's 65 or so. How old was he by the time you're looking at this saying, okay, this is actually something? And you said it was kind of incremental. What kind of time period passed before you actually had a diagnosis or knew what was going on?
I feel like it was a good 5 years in. I think it was shortly after he was like, in his early 70s, sometime there. I think that was the hard time when my mom, I think, was willing to be at that realization of saying, hey, like this, we've got to really look deeper into this. Let's go meet with a doctor. And this is the thing too. And this is another factor is my father didn't want to meet with doctors, right? He doesn't want to be poked and prodded.
Sure.
that's even as his condition worsened, that was like the last thing he ever wanted to do was to be meeting with doctors about things, and it would just frustrate him to no end. So it was just one of those hard things of, he didn't want to be taking medication. He didn't want to, be drugged or anything else. So all of these issues continue to compound. And like I said, I would go back and see him and he would just have less to say. Right. And he would be more internal, and it would just, it was hard. And just to see where his mind was going. And I would try to bring up, things that, hey, remember he just taught me so many things in my life, and to not be able to any longer discuss those things. It was apparent to me that he pretty soon had no memory of any of his life's work, right? Any of these important projects that he had engaged in over the years. He had written, published a family book of genealogy with nearly 10,000 names.
Wow.
And he had no recollection of this. He had written, he had self-published a spiritual book. We are all children of God. And he had no, it's like you try to discuss these things with him, it's clear he's not remembering. And
so Darcy, was he, earlier you mentioned that at the beginning he would get frustrated that he couldn't remember. As it got worse and he really couldn't remember some of these things, was he aware? Like would that frustration continue and get worse, or was it kind of an ignorance where he really just didn't know what he didn't know?
It was a frustration with him. I could tell that it's like he knew that something was not right. I mean, he was such a brilliant person. I mean, he had tricked doctors, right? Like the list goes on. I mean, I feel like the brilliance was always there, and he was grasping for it. And he knew that like his body is strong, and it's like he's so frustrated that like his mind is not working, and he knows it.
I think that's my personal biggest fear. Like I said before, getting to the point where you've lived a life, particularly a man as brilliant as your father, and to not be able to remember, where he went today, and the frustration that must come with that. Tell us, was your mother the primary caretaker? Did it get to the point where she needed outside help to care for him as the years went on?
So she was the primary caregiver, and she was for a good solid 11 years.
Oh my goodness.
So my father, I lost him piece by piece incrementally for 12 years. Wow. And so as things came to a head, and my mom knew that, number one, my parents wanted to come back to Utah. That was always their goal. And so they needed to get ready and sell my parents' home. And in preparation for that, I just said, Mom, I think it's time. I was like, I want to come get Dad. We're going to bring him here, and then you can get the house sold, and then, move out following that. And so that happened in 2018, is when, we made this plan. I would fly out, and then, I was, preparing obviously to bring my father back and with me. And that was a really emotional moment, because I was so worried, thinking about all the possibilities, what could happen on this flight. Mm-hmm. Like I said, like in anticipation of that, I was just praying and praying, because I was so worried that like I said, he didn't want to be touched by strangers, right? Sure. I was so worried in anticipation of like, what if the TSA pats him down and he freaks out?
What if he gets really irritable?
Yes, he's really irritable, in a bad mood. What if he, number one, doesn't want to leave my parents' home, which he had lived in for, 3 decades. Mm-hmm. And like, it was always his safe place, his garden, everything. And like, him not want, he hadn't been on a plane for many years at this point. Right. And, and prior to that, I would say prior to that moment, maybe about a year before that moment, I had come home, and this was a really devastating moment for me. I'd come home, and I had arrived, I was excited to go into my parents in their room, and my mom was in the middle of saying, Darcy's here. And then my father's response to that is, who's Darcy? Oh. And so like in that moment, it's like my heart just sank, because I'm just like, my dad doesn't know who I am. And it was just one of those things where it's like, you always feel like this is happening, but at the same time, when you have like the confirmation, you're just like, it's so devastating. And then, but I also felt like when I see him, you know, of course he sees me, he's loving, I give him a hug, but at the same time, like cognitively, he didn't know, it's like, who's Darcy, or is Darcy my daughter? You know what I mean? It's like, he can't place it. Right. Yeah. So in anticipation of like a year later, here I am about to bring him on the plane. I'm so worried that like, he's going to get upset. He's going to get frustrated. He's going to get kicked off the plane. You know what I mean? It's like, you don't follow instructions.
Right.
Like, they're like these
and it
things
just gets more aggravating and more frustrating.
Yeah. Like these things turn into felonies before you know it. Right. Like most people aren't trained. Most people aren't trained to deal with people with Alzheimer's.
No.
Right. The police aren't trained. Most professionals aren't trained. Right. This is a very special situation for people to understand the difference between somebody who's just like
belligerent.
Yes. Versus, so, you know what I mean? Like actively not
Did the flight
following.
work? Did it work out okay, or was it every disaster you'd worried about?
So I had prayed a ton. I had opened it up to my social media. I said, I need prayers for my dad today. I really do.
She did.
And it ended up being such a beautiful day. My father, I hadn't seen him in such good spirits for like ever, right? Like it was one of those things where he was totally blissful, very childlike. We had such a great time. We sat next to each other and we watched the same movie together and talked about it. And he was excited and he was enjoying, and he was pointing at the movie going on. And he was like telling me what he thought was happening. And, you know, it was just all of it. It went really well. And I was so grateful for that moment.
Beautiful. That is beautiful.
Yeah. But prior to that, I was so concerned just because thinking of all the possibilities that could happen.
The anticipation. So that was 2018 when you brought him back. How much longer did he last, and what did the end up looking like, if you don't mind my asking, as things progressed?
So he lasted about a year, just over a year. Prior to that, immediately he came in. You know, he had brothers back here he hadn't seen. Brother that's a good 12 years younger than him was like, hey, like let's have him come stay with me. I'd love to get to know him again. It's been so long. So it was beautiful that he got to re-engage with his younger brother. But once again, difficult because, like I said, he increasingly just was losing his faculties and other things. So it was difficult for him. He did enjoy that time. I think it was a beautiful time that he enjoyed, several months living with his brother. As that became increasingly difficult, he went and stayed with my sister. And then, he would occasionally come, stay with me some and my other sister on occasion. And so in that intermittent assisting of him, I can tell you it was difficult. Like it was hard. When he'd come to my home, it didn't look like what he was used to, right? He was used to my sister's house. So he'd come in and he'd look around and he'd be like frustrated, like, where are we? You know what I mean? And he'd be, he could just tell, he'd be complaining that my kitchen's in the wrong place, bedrooms are in the wrong places, like, why are the stairs over here? So like he knew what he was familiar with, and he knew that like this was not what he's familiar with, right?
This was not it.
Totally not it. And so he was totally out of sorts when he was here and frustrated by it. And he enjoyed taking a ride in the car, but if we were here, and I think bedtime was the hardest because number one, at this point, it's like he didn't sleep anymore. Like, I mean, I think he went from the most sleep he probably ever got in his life, prior was somewhere 5 to 6 hours. By this point, he might have been sleeping 1 to 2 hours, if that.
Oh my goodness.
And wow. So not even, so just restless.
So his body, restless. Like you said earlier, his body really couldn't rejuvenate or reset with that little sleep.
Not at all. And so I just remembered that like I couldn't sleep because I could hear my dad like stirring, you know what I mean? I could hear him downstairs, opening doors, opening cabinets, like, and I was so afraid that he was going to like open my front door and walk out,
right.
And like, what would I do? Like, what would I do? You know what I mean? And so I was like, I can't sleep. And I'm like, you're
just on high alert.
Yes, exactly. And I'm like, and then it's like, I know for myself, I need 7 hours. If I don't, I'm going to cry the next day. Like it's going to be a meltdown.
Well, you start to fall apart, that caregiver stress that is so wearing on you.
Yeah. And I just had a snippet of it, right? I wasn't his primary caregiver. And so I just seeing that little small amount of it was so hard, just, in the times when when I did assist. And so I just knew that, like, man, this is hard. It's hard for my sister and her family. You know, it's hard for my other sister when she assists. And so it's just one of those things where it was such a realization of, and he had lost his faculties. Suddenly I'm caring for him like a child. Right. And It's like, it's a total role reversal and so hard. And so sad. Cause like I said, it just, you know, I just know how brilliant his mind is. And just to see that we can't have those conversations, we can't reminisce, you know, I know all these things that I always wanted to talk with him about more. I'd always learned so much from him. He was my greatest teacher, and just, it doesn't happen anymore. Right. And so it was one of those things where it became so increasingly difficult too for my sister as well, that I was like, there's no way, you know, as the months roll on, that she's going to be able to continue. He needs 24-hour care, which, you know, families aren't equipped to give, right? It's like, you know, no. She has her kids, you know, she's working, her husband's working, you know, everybody's, you know what I mean? So it's just one of those things where, how do you provide that, right? Her kids are normally in school all day. So she's not at home with her kids all day. So then it became abundantly clear that we had to look into a memory care facility, which we did. So he ended up in his last, you know, few months of life in that facility, which was a beautiful place. You know, I'm grateful for the staff. I think that they were wonderful. I must say that my dad at one point he did observe and watch people put in the code, and he almost snuck out of there, and he easily could have hightailed it right out there. I mean, literally, he has such a brilliant mind
was
that,
with
like,
him to the end.
Yep. Right? He's like, I'm out of here, people. But and they had to figure that out. They're like, we've never had this happen before. We got to change the locks. We got to do all this stuff for your dad. I'm like, okay, sorry. Like, but it was just. But I am grateful for, you know, having him here, having that time with him, you know, one-on-one at the end. I guess one of my only regrets is my daughter being 13. She's never seen my dad in his, you know, in his clear mind. Right.
She never knew him that way.
She's never known him the way I knew him. And so that for me, like, you know, it's sad just because I could only tell her the stories of that. Right. But just, I was so grateful because despite the fact that my father didn't know my name, right, or couldn't say that's my daughter definitively, when I did go to see him, without fail, he always looked at me with a level of recognition. He always he knew that I was his family, but he didn't know necessarily who I was to him. He just knew that I was his some way, somehow. And so I was grateful for that.
I see where you can be grateful, and yet it's still such a painful thing.
It is.
To have your daddy not be able to recognize his baby girl. Like,
definitely.
After such a close life.
It was. And I also but I was so grateful just to be able to sit with him and hold his hand, and he'd put his arm around me. I remember it was probably sometime between probably a little more than a month before he passed. I just remember feeling like he's going to leave this earth very soon. And I just remember sitting with him, and he had his arm around me, and I just sat there and I wept, and he just put his arm around me, and he just always was loving and encouraging and just good to the end, always encouraging, just best of the best. And so it's like, I just knew it wasn't going to be much longer, and I'm just grateful to have that time with him. I just wanted to hold my dad's hand and have his arm around me, and that was beautiful, and I'm glad. And then it was a little more than a month after that, so he passed on March 9th of 2019.
So that's still very recent. I mean, at the time we're recording this, that's barely just 2 years. Can you tell us what has that journey looked like since his passing? We talk a lot on this program about resilience and what it is, and how we have kind of these journeys of resilience and the highs and the lows. Can you walk us through what that's been like for you, particularly the last couple of years since you lost him? Yeah.
I would say first and foremost, I was, you know, his funeral was a celebration. I couldn't be more proud, you know, to be his daughter. I was privileged to have the opportunity to give part of his life sketch. So his brother gave his sketch of his young life, and then I got to give his sketch starting, you know, when he graduated high school, and then I got to give his life sketch, just, and his young life and as a father and everything else. So I would say that was a beautiful moment for me, because I wanted to be able to write that all down and have that documented. And to be able to give that was definitely a gift, and to be surrounded by all my amazing siblings. My two brothers flew back from the East Coast, and obviously I have two sisters here and a brother here. So I was just so grateful. And then of course and then all of our extended family, to be surrounded by all of our extended family, and good friends of his, and people who could share stories of him that knew him in college, or at the U, or at Cornell, or served a mission with him, and just other things, just to hear more things that I had never heard before, was such a gift. And we recorded that funeral. So it's like, I've listened to that. I've listened to that from time to time, just because I like to hear the words of, from his brother's perspective of, what he was like as a brother, and what he was like growing up, because those are just cherished moments that just bring me so much joy. I would also say, in addition to that, just shifting into a place of gratitude, in knowing that I was given such a gift to grow up in the home that I grew up in. I mean, both of my parents were exceptional overachievers. Both were straight A students, and just magnified every aspect of their life. And that was who my father was. As he magnified his calling as a husband, he magnified his calling as a father. He was exceptional in the workplace, no question. But beyond that, he was just this exceptional, citizen. I mean, he would write letters to politicians if he was frustrated about something happening in the world. And he was just always writing letters, right? And just letting his voice be heard and letting it be known. So I've been in this place of gratitude in reflecting of, I am so lucky to be grown up, having the father that I have in that home, and realizing that I think many of the problems in society have come from the fact of absentee fathers. And so knowing that, like, I was given such a gift, and I am so grateful to have had him as an example in my life, that's what brings so much meaning to me, and realizing that, like, I was given such that gift growing up in that home, having such an incredible example as a father who set the bar high for my life, and what I want to achieve and how I want to live my life. So I think that my father is that for me. He's that example of how I want to be. I feel like as a person, he exemplified Christ consciousness. He is somebody who was loving and kind to everyone. He was always somebody who, like I said, was more soft-spoken, but, he was firm in his resolve, high integrity, always his word, somebody who was giving back, and always a servant leader, right? He was always teaching. He was always reaching out. If there was ever an opportunity to spend quality time with my dad one-on-one, like if it just meant going to the grocery store when I was little, I would do it. I would take that opportunity, because I just wanted to be in his presence. I wanted to be around him, because he just exuded love. And so for me, it's very much about saying, hey, this is the model I want for my life. He was such a happy person because of who he was, for the love that he had and the love that he shared for other people. So for me, it's been about, taking that meaning to heart, and internalizing that, and wanting to live up to his example as much as I can, which I know I fail on a regular basis. I think that my dad was this incredible person. The way I can best describe him is he was like a mix between Albert Einstein and Gandhi, like
that's a great mix.
It is.
Yeah. So I feel like a lot of times I meet intelligent people, but they want to let you know how smart they really are, right? They're the first to tell you how smart they are. Whereas I feel like, because he was so smart, yet he was so humble, and he was so kind. And so for me, I fall short every day, but I want to do my best to be my best self, because of the example I've been given in my home.
I love hearing this story. I've known you for a while, and I've seen you participate in political endeavors and things that you're interested and passionate about. Your justice, what is it called? The
Utah Justice Coalition.
Utah Justice Coalition. There's my Alzheimer's showing. I couldn't think about it. Anyway, you're involved in those things that you're very passionate about. I can see a lot of similarities of the example your dad set and the direction that your life has taken off. And I'm sure he's very proud of his daughter.
I hope so.
I'm sure he is. It is so difficult to lose the people that we love in little increments and pieces while we are watching it happen. And, you know, the hard thing is that when it's our parents, we grow up and we move on. We move away from them. We get busy with our own lives. We have our own obligations. And sometimes it's just distance. I know for me, I'm 12 hours away from my parents. It's not easy to bridge that gap. And you know, it's so challenging to go through something like this and lose them. And it's also interesting that for your dad, this was really drawn out. He'd been showing signs for a very long time. We had a show that we did earlier with Raven, who is a program manager for the Alzheimer's Association. She pointed out that the average span of this disease is about 8 years. So he definitely pushed the limits even on this. Had to be really challenging for your mom as well.
Yes, it was definitely difficult. I can't imagine, because like I said, I just got a small, in the time when he would come to visit me, and it was challenging because, like I said, he'd be stirring all night. He'd be upset that, my house didn't look like my sister's house, or just, generally frustrated with things. And I was thinking, man, it would be so hard to do this for a decade or longer.
Oh, yeah. And it's just so challenging because they do get so confused. They get set in their ways, and then they are very confused if their surroundings change. So that going to place had to be a real challenge for his mind as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so amazing. I just really appreciate you coming on and sharing this.
Darcy, thank you for joining us and sharing so much about this brilliant, loving man. I've got that image now of Einstein meets Gandhi in my mind, and what a unique combination that is. There are a lot of brilliant people. There are a lot of compassionate people. The most brilliant people are not always the most compassionate, and vice versa. And what a gift that you had and still have to have him in your life, and the legacy that he leaves for your family, for generations. And it just sounds like such a story I'm sure a lot of people listening can identify with. A lot of us know someone who, as they've gotten older, struggles, and we watch them deteriorate, and the toll that takes, or the care that they need. Thank you for being willing to be real with us and to share your memories and also share your emotion. I think that's so valuable for the people who are listening to feel that. I think the only rule we'll ever give someone who might cry on the show is you'll never cry alone, right, Michelle? Right. We're in here with a box of Kleenex, and we will cry right with you because we can feel the love you and your father share. And I don't even know you, but I can feel that through this interview that we've conducted. So thank you for sharing with us. Thank you to our listeners for listening. Again, this is a 3-part series on Alzheimer's we're doing right now. So if you've missed the other 2, back up and go listen to those. And as always, if you're listening and you or someone you know has a story of real life and real challenges and real tools to rise above, please reach out. We'd love to share those with our listeners. You can find us on social media at Relentlessly Resilient on Facebook and on Instagram at Relentlessly Resilient Podcast. So find us on your favorite podcast platform, subscribe, give us a like and a review. We'd love to hear from you and know how we can make the show better to help these conversations take place. And just thank you so much for joining us today and always.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on. If you or someone you love is dealing with dementia or Alzheimer's, be sure to go to alz.org, and you will find an 800 number for support and help, and a lot of resources for information and both to take care of your own mind and also resources for support groups for caregivers. Yeah. As always, remember, whatever you do in the world, be kind. You never know what others are dealing with in their own lives. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.